welcome back to another episode of the Sussex Azure User Group podcast. I think we're on episode 18 now, and today I'm joined again by Ryan. Hey Ryan, how are you?
Good, Jack. How you doing?
Yeah, all right. It's been a busy week. Juggling jury service and a job in a COVID pandemic is an interesting challenge, but we're getting there.
It's crazy. I can't believe we're up to 18 podcasts already. It's absolutely blasting through them. It feels like we only started it beginning of the pandemic, and we're doing more than one a month based on that math. So yeah, we're doing all right.
Yeah, and some big plans for 2021, right? And we're also joined today by our fellow colleague from the MCS side of the world of Microsoft, Will. Hey, Will, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you very much for inviting me along to podcast number 18. Hopefully I'll make it to 19 and 20, but we'll see how we do today.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Will, so you work for Microsoft Consulting Services, right? Or MCS as it's deemed most of the time inside of Microsoft. So yeah, it'd be great to sort of find out a little bit more about yourself, a bit of background, like how you got here, what you've been up to before, and yeah, we'll take it from there.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm Will Jones. I work for MCS, as Jack you've alluded to. I've actually only been in Microsoft 6 months now, or just over 6 months. So started Microsoft in lockdown during a global pandemic, and that was a whole thought process of, Jesus, should I be changing jobs in a global pandemic? But if we
there's quite a few of you as well, Will. I keep meeting people that have started in the pandemic, and Jack is one of them as well. We were saying earlier, it's crazy that you've not physically really met anyone, and you've been working and getting involved in customers. It shows what an amazing digital world we live in now.
It really does. It really does. Could we have done this 5 years ago? Probably not. Thanks to Teams and the ilk, we certainly can. But yeah, so rewinding the clock a few years, I've worked in IT since 2008, since dropping out of university because I thought I was useless at computing, only to end up in computing, working my way from working in a tiny little SMB as a data analyst and spare time IT guy to grow, help, watching that business grow from 30 people to 500 to 1,000, then going, I need a new challenge, and eventually we're ending up in a Microsoft partner in data centers, hosting what we would have called cloud back then, but was actually just a colo data center, to then pivoting within that company from hosted exchange services, which was Europe's largest hosted exchange before Office 365 came along. So working in data centers, racking, stacking, Wintel, all that kind of stuff, to pivoting to doing Azure. And the real bit that got me into Azure, and this did lead me on the path to where I am today, so I'm massively grateful to this, and it was sheer luck. I got a random invite to an Azure Cloud Solution Architect Bootcamp in Seattle. Went to Seattle for a week, learned about Azure, learned about IaaS, PaaS, IoT, suddenly realized, oh my God, the world is changing, but this is awesome. I want to know more. Getting fully embraced in Azure for the past 5 or so years. Ended up working for a large multinational, being a cloud SME. And then, yeah, actually about 12 months ago is when I got the first call of, would you be interested in a job in Microsoft? And it took 12 months of making decisions, going through interviews, that kind of stuff, to finally committing and landing in Microsoft services last year, in July last year.
Well, it's great to have you aboard, Will. And actually, we realised today that Will and I had met each other before we've invited Will onto the podcast. Will used to work for a customer of mine when I was working the retail side of Microsoft as well. So, yeah, small world IT typically is.
Yes, it's shameful that it took us a while to realise we'd met before.
Yeah, it was quite a weird reunion over Teams this morning when you two were going, were you at this customer? Yeah, I remember you. And then I'm just sitting there going, all right, here we go, this will be an interesting podcast. They're just going to be reminiscing about customer times. But what a weird world. The only people that I've actually met from Microsoft is you, Ryan, as well. So there you go, you are the glue holding me and Will to Microsoft.
Yeah, it could all be a ruse. It will be a...
So interesting sort of career journey, and like dropping out of uni and then sort of just going, I'm going to go into the real world and get a job and go and learn that way. How did you you find that process? As in, was it quite a big decision then, like to say, actually, uni's not working for me. I'm out. I'm going to go and do something different. Did you have something lined up before you took the plunge, or did you just go, let's go for it?
That's a great question. Actually, the answer, you're probably going to be like, what? So actually, ever since I was a little kid, I always wanted to be a policeman. And when I was at uni, I was a policeman. So I was a volunteer police officer and done it for a couple of years. And I was like, right, this is the goal. I want to be a policeman. That's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And to blow my own trumpet, I was bloody good at it as well. I absolutely loved it. And there's no other job like it. Dropped out of uni and went, right, let's take it seriously now. It was then that I discovered my eyesight wasn't good enough to actually join as a regular, fully paid police officer. And then went, I need to get a real job now and sort my life out. So I was good at computing, just the university way of learning is not for me. And I don't think anyone should be ashamed of saying that. You're young, you get distracted by other things, but you still have a passion for certain things, right? I still have a passion for IT. I have a passion for solving problems. And I have a passion for how technology can help solve those problems. So dropping back into IT, if I was to describe it as that, wasn't too difficult for me. I'm a logical person, and taking on those an IT role was fairly easy. The difficult step is moving from that first role into the next role. I think you have to spend an awful lot of time thinking about what you find interesting about IT, whether it's being a server engineer, whether it's being cybersecurity, a programmer, whatever it may be. And then you've got to challenge yourself to go and upskill yourself. And then you've also got to show any potential employers, whether it's internal or back out in the wider world, that not only do you know what you're talking about, you've got something that shows that as well. And for me, it was getting Microsoft certifications, that bit of paper that says, I do know what I'm talking about. I can prove it, and here's a piece of paper as well to back it up.
What I find interesting about you, Will, is that you've got a similar background to myself and Jack. Is data center, infrastructure guy, that kind of core knowledge. But you're transitioned more into that developer world now, where you're looking at a lot of automation. And Jack and I have done some previous podcasts on this, but it's interesting to see that kind of mind shift into the building blocks, into the developer part of the IT world. How did you make that transition, and what was interesting to you to change your kind of skill set to working in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. For years you spend racking servers, deploying Windows Server, Active Directory on premise, WSUS, all those exciting things, right? And then I suddenly realized there's so much more to this, right? Because in a traditional IT world, you almost pass that off to someone else who goes and puts an application on it, and you don't really think much more about it. But when I went off and did the boot camp, I realized actually you can do an awful lot as a developer, writing code and writing applications without worrying about the server and the tin and the stack behind it now, because you've got the likes of Azure Web Apps or Azure Functions where you can just push your code. So for me, if I was to put on like a little selfish hat for a second, I was like, oh, I need to upskill a little bit here because racking and stacking is old school. But I wasn't scared of that. And I don't think anyone should be scared of that, because if you work in IT and you're a logical person, you can absolutely start to embrace these next logical steps in computing, right? And I've talked to loads of people about this, and a lot of IT professionals, kind of their next step is to move into infrastructure as code and DevOps and those kind of things, which I absolutely do. And that's probably my bread and butter in Microsoft services. But I have an interest and I have a passion for, can I solve this in code? So, and I won't pretend to be a hardcore developer or anything like that, but I know enough C# to be dangerous. And I'm constantly learning about new things, how I can do things in C#, looking at SDKs, the Azure SDK, the Graph SDK, and the C# functions, and developing stuff that I never would have done 5 years ago, because I went on this journey of going, oh, this looks interesting, I'm going to start reading about this.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, that whole sort of developer mindset shift. I think we spoke with April on the podcast, as you mentioned, Ryan, about this, and it was a really popular episode, and loads of people were really interested. We talked around that whole change of sort of infra people's mindset to getting on board with sort of a GitOps world, and even just using Git to store text files. Right,
Yeah.
I used to be a network engineer, so the amount of times I'd put ASA code or Cisco IOS code in a text file and then go, what did I do last time? How did I get this to work? And then have to back up my configs every time and all that sort of stuff. If I just have used Git and GitHub, I'd have been a lot better off, and made a lot less typos, and I could have put some testing around that sort of stuff and all that world. But just wasn't a world, and Git was for devs. Why would I touch it? And suddenly, like yourself, heavily on the infrastructure as code world and DevOps, and you look back and you go, I could have done so much more in so little time by just adopting some of these things.
Yeah,
I think that's relevant to a lot of IT really, because I remember, I was a Linux admin before, and I would have just strings of commands or different programs that I'd use just stored in a random notebook file that I'd end up just looking back to copy and pasting. Same with my Exchange days, when a lot of it went to PowerShell in terms of upgrades and making changes to clusters and everything else. You just kind of nick those little, PowerShell commandlets and different triggers on them as well, just to remember them. GitHub would
Yeah,
have just fixed all of that.
absolutely. So does that mean you know how to use Vi properly and get out of it?
For me,
Yeah, because
well, not that I'll tell anyone.
all I know is, like, what is it? Control Shift and like a colon and then Q, and that's it. I'm out. I've escaped. That's all I know about Vi.
just Q exclamation mark.
Yeah,
Who,
I have to get into
who
Nano.
remembers that? Who's going to work that out without Google to one side to tell you?
Exactly. And I think, taking on another point you said there, Will, around, you know enough C# to be dangerous. I know no C# at all. I could read it and have a go at what's going on and think back to my like VB days in college and go,
Yeah.
like, I sort of get the constructs of publics and classes and stuff like that. But actually, when I'm using Azure Functions, I'm like yourself. I want to solve problems and do things in Azure Functions because I don't want to worry about the platform. I just want to put code up there and make it do things.
Yeah.
As soon as PowerShell support came along for it, I was like, right, I'm here. Here we go. Let's crack on. Let's go and do some of this stuff. So yeah, I think that should be another avenue that people, if you're good at PowerShell, you can have a go at Azure Functions and start this sort of serverless world with just PowerShell, because there's PowerShell support for everything nowadays.
And PowerShell's another programming language, right?
Exactly.
It's probably easier to start working with it than C#, granted. But if you start, the logic's the same, right? And if you start there, don't be afraid to challenge yourself and think, how will I do this in another language, whether it's Python, C#, whatever it may be? See it as a stepping stone.
Yeah, absolutely. But building like your first API using PowerShell was like a really like light bulb moment for me. Like, I was like, okay, the world's really my oyster now, because I've got the basic construct. I can get things in, I can pass parameters in, and it spits different things back out. I can do whatever I like now.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's an interesting world.
So well, you mentioned you dropped into Microsoft in the MCS part of the business, Microsoft Consulting Services. As when I worked before I started working for Microsoft as a partner, MCS was always this kind of mythical beast for smaller companies, in a way that they were the arm of Microsoft that would do the doing, the professional services with customers. But I wouldn't know how to engage them. I guess, could you give like a synopsis of who MCS are, the kind of customers that they work with, and are they always focused on monster projects, or do they get involved in some of the smaller stuff as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's a great point, right? I hadn't even, maybe I shouldn't admit to this, but I hadn't even heard of Microsoft Services until I had an interview for Microsoft Services, right? So it was a new world to me, and I totally get it from the outside. It's how does this fit in with the wider Microsoft org and what they're trying to do? Now, I'm going to be completely upfront here and say I'm going to read the blurb, right, the corporate speak for what we do, and then I'm going to translate it into what I think we do, and then my boss can decide if I've done something wrong and said something wrong here. But I hope between the two, we'll come up with an answer on what we all think it does and what we do. So I work for UK MCS, which is part of the Microsoft UK sub. The way it's described is kind of the tip of the spear, the tip of the Microsoft spear in terms of modernizing and transforming customers through our expertise and what we do. In terms of the customers that we work for the customers that we see as strategically important. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the customers that are spending the most money in Azure or Dynamics 365 or Office 365. It's the ones that we think are strategically important. So we could be working with a customer right now who isn't spending very much, but we see what they're doing and we want to be part of that journey. So, you know, there is one way of thinking of us as a partner, right? So we are like any other partner out there. And we do even work with other partners. You know, we don't work siloed on our own as part of Microsoft. You know, Microsoft throw us some work and we go off and win the deal and do the work. We would do it with other partners involved as well. Just like any organization would work with multiple partners when they're looking to tender out work, we could be one of those partners. I do think the benefit of working in MCS is behind me, I have the might of Microsoft in what I do. So as a lowly consultant on the ground, right, when I go into customer site and we're doing workshops or I'm actually building or whatever it may be, I always say this to the customer as well. I am the face of Microsoft to you, but I'm just your conduit in, and there's a few of us within the team that are your conduits in, but that's the conduit into the rest of Microsoft. So, you know, I'm a member of God knows how many worldwide communities around ARM deployment experts to Cosmos DB, whatever it may be, but I'm your conduit into getting those answers or giving feedback, which is just as important, bringing that feedback back into the product groups for the various things we do. So that's kind of the corporate speak, with a bit of my speak in the middle. If I was to really dumb it down, we're insured to work on production. It's probably, which is probably the most basic way to say it, to do it. You know, describe what we do. We go in and we will deliver IT services or cloud services, and we're broken down to 3 columns, which are Azure Cloud and AI, Dynamics 365, and Modern Workplace. And then we have various streams within the Azure Cloud and AI domain, which is the domain I'm in. So data analytics or cloud modernization, app modernization, those kind of things. So we all kind of have a little specialism within it. But because we're quite a big team with Azure Cloud and AI, we do cross-skill each other. We learn from each other. We've got this big bubble of, I think, some of the best people I've ever worked with, quite frankly. And it's easy to kind of get imposter syndrome when you first walk in the doors working for Microsoft. But yeah, we will deploy all the way up to production in the most simplest form. You know, there are potentially other business units that go all the way up to production, but no further. They don't go into production. We are insured to go that step into production and deploy production services.
And I think that's a key differentiator, right? You're insured to go into production, but also you've got that kind of hotline to product group and the teams that are actually making the software and the platform to be able to, if you've got a bug or something that needs changing, you're just that one step ahead of another partner in terms of engaging the people that are doing that. Also, there's going to be customers, I suppose, that want to deal with Microsoft directly for a very large and critical project to them, and they don't want other people in the mix. So it makes a lot of sense. What does your kind of day-to-day look like? Are you always hands-on, or is there a pre-sales element? How do you engage with customers in your role?
Yeah, so pre-sales is generally, potentially, luckily, I think for me anyway, is dealt with by an architect or a group of architects and our pre-sales team. As a consultant, I will get involved once the contract's signed, effectively. But myself and the other consultants in my team will go in and we will run workshops if we're doing kind of discovery days to understand what it is we're doing, whether it's, if we, you know, Jack, I know you from enterprise scale, right? So yeah. If I'm doing an enterprise scale engagement, we'll run a series of workshops. So I'll run those workshops with my consultants, working with the customer to understand what they need out of an enterprise scale landing zone. And then we'll move into the deployment phase and we'll do that build and deployment as well. So yeah, up front, there's absolutely kind of workshops and talking and getting to know each other and If it wasn't a global pandemic, it would be going to have a coffee, walking around the lake, ideally, going to have some food and beers afterwards to help build up that rapport. The rapport is so important to me. Getting to know the people I'm working with from the customer side is critical for me. Then we do those workshops, and then we get on and do the build and deploy. So I'm more focused on infrastructure as code, absolutely. But at the same time, we've got consultants that are doing app development work, and they'll be heads down doing user stories and writing code to solve particular problems.
So is that how you typically get specialized into areas? So is your primary focus the infrastructure / governance side, as I think infra is molding into that really governance, security, and all those things wrap into that, or do you say, actually, look, I specialize on networking, for instance, or I specialize on compute platform? How does it sort of work within MCS? As in, do you get assigned to projects based on your skill sets, or are you very much like you're in a team, a V team within MCS, and this team always goes to different projects based on availability?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it changed 2 days after I started. In fact, there was a massive reorg 2 days after I started. So the boss that hired me actually moved into another part of the org 2 days after I started, and I got a new boss, which was weird because, like, you don't know me, you've never interviewed me, but I now work for you. But before that change, there were domains that were more aligned to what you've described, Jack. So there was a secure infrastructure domain, which was kind of the infrastructure, the networking. There was a development domain, so writing applications, and there was, I think it was a security domain. But those would have crossed between Office 365, Microsoft 365, Azure. Now what we've got, and how it's been merged together, is we have an Azure cloud and AI domain, where all of us within it might have particular kind of skill set. So I was hired into secure infra. So yeah, absolutely, kind of my bread and butter. If someone's paying for me to do something, and they want to get results quickly, that's it's that kind of governance, landing zones, policies, networking, all those good things to get your cloud up and running. But there's a peer of mine in exactly the same group, and her expertise is writing applications and coding applications. So internally within the team, we do have our specialisms, and they're published and those kind of things. But the real benefit now is I can go, you know what? We've got a big engagement that is doing a cloud app modernizations. They're writing cloudy applications from the ground up. You're absolutely going to need some good governance, some good controls, those landing zones and all those other bits. So I'm going to come in and help do that bit. But whilst I'm here, I'm going to upskill and I'm going to learn from my peer she's an excellent programmer. So I want to learn what she does and start to pick up on some of those skill sets. So we can kind of cross bleed some of those skill sets as time goes on.
That's interesting. And I think another thing to pick up on what you said in the last question around, me and you met via enterprise scale, right? We're part of the internal V team in the UK that helps, test things out, have ideas, have discussions around it, customer challenges, all those sort of bits, and feedback into the engineering teams that create the product. And that just shows that it's really that one Microsoft approach. I work in one part of the organisation called the CSU, the Customer Success Unit. Ryan works in another area called the Sales. What is it? Sales Technical Unit, STU.
Specialist Technical Unit.
Specialist Technical Unit, and then you work in it, MCS. So we love a 3-letter acronym. If anybody wants to invent another one, then feel free to post it in. But there really is that one Microsoft message. We all work on customers together collaboratively. It's not like, oh, okay, if you're going to use MCS, then you can't engage with the CSU, and vice versa. As you said, enterprise scale. I'm working with one of my customers right now with some of your colleagues from MCS on a project, and we're constantly working, helping each other out. There really are no lines apart from that one clear line of, I don't deploy to production. I sit over shoulders and say, no, I would do that, and that you can do this, and point to documentation and advise, very much to what you do, Ryan, in your role. We advise and we guide and we do that pre-sales element. But when it comes to pushing the big red button into production, that's not us. That you bring in a partner, you do it yourselves, or you work with MCS.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had a project with the colleague that you work with now on an enterprise scale engagement. I worked with him previously on another enterprise scale engagement, and we worked really closely with the CSA from CSU as part of that engagement, there was this beautiful flow of handover that, one way you could look at it is he was checking our homework and making sure we're doing things right. But from the customer perspective, they would have seen this one Microsoft flow from that engagement of all the work that you guys do within the CSU to get them up to a point, us working together and taking over and doing that move into production. Now, deployed to production, yes, we have the ability to deploy in production. We obviously do all the bits leading up to that as well. We are doing the non-prod, that and kind of stuff. But yeah, I think right now, having seen some of the examples in action, we've got that perfect kind of flow of that one Microsoft approach, and I've seen it in action, and it's really good.
Yeah.
So one thing that intrigues me is that obviously being so close to the Microsoft engine, you must be able to interact with some pretty high profile customers and get engaged with some really cool projects where they want to use MCS to do something that may be a bit bleeding edge, something that's not done before. Are you able to share anything that you've worked on, or a customer transformation that you may have done, or an application, something that's you wouldn't have done as a partner before in another organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are kind of the public kind of customer stories that we have within MCS that I could kind of just throw some names out there now around kind of Centrica, NHS Scotland, Diageo drinks company. I believe that was the largest SAP estate ever migrated to Azure with Diageo. So there's some massive projects that go on, and without naming any customers, that some of the projects that I've seen coming up, there are some absolutely amazing potential projects around supercomputing. One customer that has the need for archive storage, that to the point that I think we're going to be building an entire data center of tape libraries just for them. So wow. Scale is just off the wall in terms of some of those projects that we're working on. And if I wasn't working for Microsoft, I'd be so scared of the concept of some of these projects. But I know that I've got this whole group of people behind me that can help answer questions, solve issues, all the way up to the product group, right? We can speak to
and that's insane, right? Being involved in a project where you're actually influencing the build of Azure regions and the hardware that's going in them based on a customer need. That's something that's, quite unique to MCS in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think that there's a huge difference for partners in that respect. Partners do have a great communication channel through, right? It just so happens we're on slightly other side of the doors, so we maybe are a bit more fortunate in that it is easier for us to build up those relationships internally.
Yeah, and I think that's important. Working from the partner side, we've all worked in partners, right? I've worked in partners, you've worked at partners, Will, Ryan's worked at partners, and we've all never had that issue of getting answers from Microsoft and speaking to people. But as you say, it's to use a networking term, as I love to do, it's a few less hops.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the way. But and as you say, we still work with partners. So on that enterprise scalable engagement I'm working on, partners are engaged, and everybody's working together to make sure the delivery's right for the customer. That's all we really care about, is the customer success and the customer delivery of that project. And I suppose that's probably an interesting question that I've got. Is I take it that from MCS it's typical projects sort of style, like agile. I'd imagine by now, as in agreeing scopes, sprints, all those sort of things, and that's the way you work on these projects, or does it work differently to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Agile sprints. There are, and I'm yet to see an answer, and I'd love for people to give me an answer to some of these bits. But occasionally you have to go into waterfall. So when you've got some kind of contractual obligations around, you have to get a design signed off, or whatever it may be. Occasionally Agile drops into waterfall and then back into Agile again. But when we're in that delivery phase of actually, we are getting stuff done, we're at the point of, heaven forbid I say, delivering value, then yeah, absolutely, that's the Agile part of the project. I'm still working that out personally. I think I've just about, I get my head around the best way to work Agile, and then there's some other bit that comes along. But yeah, we are Agile in that respect.
So if I'm a customer that wants to work with MCS, how do I go about doing it? Because obviously, it's not standard kind of approach. Is it reach out to your Microsoft account team and they will then kind of bring in somebody from MCS to talk to you. Is that the standard method of engagement?
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And you speak to your account managers or your customer success teams, and they will kind of start that engagement and do the kind of the pre-sales and the delivery part of it, and work out where MCS can fit into that. And internally, we have this kind of library of offerings. What we offer is in terms of what MCS can do. That's kind of headed up by the Solution Architect Office, which is a kind of global role of what it is, what our capabilities are. And then those are made into offerings. We sell the offerings, and those offerings eventually drop down to us as a consultant to deliver.
Okay. And I guess for some of our international listeners, is MCS exist in every Microsoft, country that has presence in, or is it just in certain regions?
I think that's a good question, man. And I'm going to say
I'm throwing a spanner in the works.
It's certainly in most, if not all, regions. I think that's probably a way to cover myself there. But my first ever engagement in MCS was about a month after I started, and it was for an international customer whose head office was in Japan, but the deal was done through the UK. And we had two consultants from the UK, one from Germany, a project manager who was based in India. So it's a global team in that respect. And we will identify the consultants or the PMs or whoever it may be within MCS that have the right skills to deliver the project on a global level. And that's one thing I absolutely love, is every project I go on to, I could be working with people from all over the world. And you build up these relationships with these consultants or PMs, and then you move on to the next project. And like 2 or 3 months later, you get a random message from them, and they go, "Oh, we haven't spoken for ages," and you start catching up again. But it's this opportunity to work with such a diverse group of people. It's just absolutely brilliant. I don't consider myself Microsoft UK. I consider myself Microsoft, which is a global.
That's something that I picked up on when I started, is that you kind of settle into your role, and you've got your kind of immediate V team of people that you work with. It's only when you guys will see this when you start to travel and go to Seattle, and you see the scale of the organization, and you just kind of get mind blown in terms of the amount of people that are in a similar role to yourself, doing the same things with other customers as part of the machine. And like you say, when you start to interact with other Microsoft subsidiaries in different countries, it just kind of opens your eyes to it, and it's nice to see that come into your day to day.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. Just that different people every day it can be within Microsoft.
Yeah,
cool.
I'm certainly looking forward to that bit at most. I think that's the bit we'll be both missing joining in the pandemic. The lack of travelling and going to Seattle and seeing Redmond and those sort of bits and pieces that are part of the general onboarding process. I cannot wait for those things to be back online when it's safe to do so, and it's the right time. But yeah, I can't wait to get out there and sort of get that scale, Ryan. As you say, like I think that's when me and you spoke when you first joined. You were like in Seattle, and you were like, it's just mind blowing. Like you just can't put it into words.
Yeah, you just can't believe it when you're there. So, I guess kind of to wrap up, one thing that I wanted to kind of announce with Jack as part of this podcast was Will's going to be a fairly regular feature of some of our stuff that we do. We've been working with Will to look at how we do some more technical and kind of sessions where we could do kind of live hacks or kind of code together stuff as part of the stuff. I don't know, Will, did you want to share some of your ideas of what we're looking to put together?
Yeah, absolutely. And, these are all ideas that are up for argument, debate, change. I'll throw some ideas out there. As I say, I know enough C# to be dangerous, and I get excited about stuff, right? And I see, what can I build today? Or here's a thing I made, except it's not the Lego behind me. It's something I've written in code. And one thing that I've played around with in the past, and I come back to it every so often because I've got a little bit better at writing code, is the concept of, say, a simple password manager using Azure Key Vault. I'm not sure whether I trust centralized password managers, because they're kind of like, a perfect target for a lot of spurious people, shall we say.
Definitely the crown jewels if you manage to infiltrate LastPass or someone like that.
Yeah, but could I make my own password manager? Is that possible? And absolutely, Azure has the components to do that. It's got the key vault, it's got the API solution, it's got the identity solution. So one thing I've started thinking about is maybe we could, as a group, do a little bit of a hackathon around making our own password manager, right? Using key vault, using a function, using Azure AD, which bits should we leverage to, and that might demo some of those interesting components, right? But it has a solution at the end of it. And it solves a problem for me as well. So maybe this should just be a whole bunch of sessions about stuff Will needs. Can we help make it?
That sounds very cool. And like Jack, C# is completely, a language that I'm not intimate with any time. I took the Azure Architect exam in beta, and they put one of the app dev questions, which was just a page of C#, and you had to put the variables in the right places. And I was like a deer in headlights, just the panic of, oh my gosh, I don't know what any of this means. But that sounds really fun, actually. And I'd like to invite, some of the people listening, maybe we, do it with us. Jack and I can learn how to do it with Will, and code along with us in the background, and you can learn something as well. Jack and I were also talking about some of the platform and infrastructure stuff, about how we could take our podcast website and slice and dice it into different hosting methods. So move it into container, move it into app service. There's a lot of ways you can host web apps now. We've got some ideas around that. So keep listening to our Twitter feed and everything else, and we'll start to spin up some of these mini series from here.
Yeah, and I think, just to catch up on what Will said there, these are purely ideas at the moment, that we've got a few sort of very hot ideas that we want to progress with. But if there's anything in particular that you want to, see us do or to see us tackle as a challenge, tweet us. I think it's probably the best way. We'll feed that into the channel, and we can take that on. And I think we're willing to back all of this, right, with code examples, GitHub repos that we public for everybody to use, and all that sort of stuff. So, tweet now and get your ideas in, and we'll definitely evaluate those and see what else we can include into these hacks. But I love the idea of a password manager, because I had that same thought the other day with my LastPass. I was like, what happens if this goes wrong? And it was actually more from the fact of, what happens if I do really lose my recovery password? What happens when my MFA token does blow up and I've got no recovery method? So yeah, I love that as an idea. So yeah, I'm really keen to progress that, and it could be quite an easy one to start tackling with. The components from an Azure side are fairly simple, right? But the rest that wraps around it,
in theory,
in theory,
we can start easy, and just we could do it as a really simple API, and then maybe we go, this works, but do we want a nice little UI around it? Do we want to find other things we can do with it? So it's not about trying to build an amazing application from day zero, but how we can start to plug some of these components together to do interesting things.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, watch this space, and let us know if there's anything you want to see out there in the community. But yeah, I think it's been awesome having you. Really interesting insight into MCS, and also your personal background around. I wasn't expecting the policeman answer. You're right, definitely wasn't expecting that. So yeah, you win this evening's surprise award. But yeah, look forward to working with you more in the future, and stay tuned, everyone.
Yeah, and thanks very much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Jack, as I said to you over Teams, I want to get involved in the community, but I want to just borrow someone else's hard work. I don't want to start from the beginning. So,
more than welcome to use our platform.
Channel hijacked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
cool.
Yeah,
all right,
echoing Jack. Yeah, thanks, Will, for joining us. It's been a great insight, and we'll catch you on the next one.